Now I think I'm sick. You know what? I probably am sick because I was around a lot of people on Saturday. So I probably am sick. Oh my god. Ugh. I feel like crap. Hello. Also, in case you were here yesterday and you heard me talk about my math test, I failed it. And I'm actually really mad that I failed it because I was so sure that I had passed with flying numbers, and then I got the score back and I had failed it, and I was like, truly, I thought I did everything that I was supposed to do. Yeah, so that's how that went. But anyway, we're not here to talk about fucking math. We're here to talk about Empire of Storms. We're reading 30 through 32 today. And yeah, I'm just gonna get started because my throat's already hurting, so I think I will. I had because my friend is a math teacher, and I had sat down for like 3 hours and gone over like everything that I needed to go over for the test with her. And so I went into the test like, oh, I got this, like I can do this, I know all the equations, I know how to solve this and that. And what makes me the most mad is that I'm pretty sure that I got the answers wrong because of like little mistakes, because I had to write out so much. I'm sure I forgot to like carry a sign over, or like I forgot to carry like a letter over. Like I'm sure it was something so little and trivial that just made me get the entire answer wrong. But anyway, I think I will, because I'm so mad. Anyway, chapter 30. We're just gonna go ahead and start because I want to dive into, I don't want to think about school. I want to think about what's gonna happen next. All right. After 2 weeks of inching across the muddy open plains, Alid was tired of using her mother's name, tired of constantly being on alert to hear it barked by Molly to clean up after every meal. A mistake, no doubt, to have ever told the woman she had some experience washing dishes in busy kitchens. Tired of hearing Ombriel, the dark-haired beauty, not a carnival act at all, but Molly's niece and their money keeper, use it when questioning about how she'd hurt her leg, where her family came from, and how she'd learned to observe others so keenly that she could turn a coin as an oracle. At least Lorcan barely used it, as they'd hardly spoken while the caravan trudged through the mud-laden fields. The ground was so saturated with the daily afternoon summer rain that the wagons often became stuck. They'd barely covered any distance at all, and when Ombriel would catch a lead gazing northward, she'd ask, yet another recurring question, what lay in the north, to draw her attention so frequently. Alid always lied, always evaded. The sleeping situation between Alid and her husband, fortunately, was more easily avoided. With the sodden earth, sleeping on it was nearly impossible, so the women laid out wherever they could in the 2 wagons, leaving the men to draw straws each night for who would get any remaining space, and who would sleep on the ground atop a makeshift floor of reeds. Lorcan somehow always got the short straw, either by his own devices, sleight of hand from Nick, who ran security and the nightly straw drawing, or simply from sheer bad luck. But at least it kept Lorcan far, far away from her, and kept their interactions to a minimum. Those few conversations they'd held when he escorted her to draw water from a swollen stream or gather whatever firewood could be found on the plain weren't much to bother her either. He pressed her for more details regarding Morath, more information about the guards' clothes, the armies camped around it, the servants and witches. She'd started at the top of the keep, with the Aeries and Wyverns and witches. Then she descended, floor by floor. It had taken them these 2 weeks to work their way down to the sublevels. And their companions had no idea that while the young married couple snuck off for more firewood, whispering sweet nothings was the last thing on their minds. When the caravan stopped that night, Alid aimed for for a copse of trees in the heart of the field to see what could be used at their large campfire. Lorcan trailed at her side, as quiet as the hissing grasses around them. The nickering of the horses and clamor of their companions readying for the evening meal faded behind, and Alid frowned as her boot sank deep into the pocket of mud. She yanked on it, ankle barking at bearing her weight, and gritted her teeth until Lorcan's magic pushed against her leg, an invisible hand freeing her boot, and she tumbled into him. His arm and side were as hard and unyielding as the magic he'd used. Oh! Oh! And she rebounded away, tall grass crunching beneath her. "Thank you," she murmured. Lorcan stalked ahead and said without looking back, "We finished at 3 dungeons and their entrances yesterday night. Tell me about what's inside them." Her mouth went a bit dry as she recalled the cells she'd squatted in, the darkness and tight air. "I don't know what's inside," she lied, following him. "Suffering people, no doubt." Lorcan stooped, his dark head disappearing beneath a wave of grass. When he emerged, 2 sticks were gripped in his massive hands. He snapped them with little effort. "You described everything else with no problem. Yet your scent changed just now. Why?" She strode past him, bending over and over to collect whatever scattered wood she could find. "They did horrible things down there," she said, over his shoulder. You could sometimes hear people screaming. She prayed Terracin would be better. It had to be. "Who do they keep down there? Enemy soldiers?" "Potential allies, no doubt, for whatever he planned to do. Whoever they wanted to torture. The hands of those guards, their sneers. I assume you're going to leave as soon as I finish describing the last pit of Morath." She plucked up stick after stick, ankle objecting with each shift in her balance. "Is there a problem if I do?" "That was our bargain. I've stayed longer than I intended." She turned, finding him with an armful of larger sticks. He unceremoniously dumped them into the small pile in her arms and thumbed free the hatchet at his side before prowling to the curving, fallen branch behind him. "So am I just to play the abandoned wife, then?" "You're already playing the oracle, so what difference does another role make?" Lorcan brought his hatchet down upon the branch with a solid thwack. The blade sank unnervingly deep. Wood groaned. Describe the dungeons. It was only fair, and it had been their bargain, after all. His protection and help to get her out of harm's way in exchange for what she knew. And he'd been complacent in all the lies she'd spun to their company. Quiet, but he'd gone along with it. "The dungeons are gone," Alid managed to say. "Or most of them should be, along with the catacombs." Thwack, thwack, thwack. Lorcan severed the branch, the wood yielding with a splintering cry. He set to cutting another section apart. "Taken out in a blast?" He lifted his axe, the muscles in his powerful back shifting beneath his dark shirt, but paused. "You said you were near the courtyard when the blast happened. How do you know the dungeons are gone?" Fine. She had lied about it, but the explosion came from the catacombs and took out some of the towers. One would assume the dungeons would be in its path too. "I don't make plans based on assumptions." He resumed hacking apart the branch, and Alid rolled her eyes at his back. "Tell me the layout of the northern dungeon." Alid turned toward the sinking sun, staining the fields with orange and gold beyond them. "Figure it out yourself." The thud of metal on wood halted. Even the wind in the grasses died down. But she had endured death and despair and terror, and she had told him enough, turned over every horrible stone, looked around every dark corner at Morath for him. His rudeness, his arrogance, he could go to hell. She had barely set one foot into the swaying grasses when Lorcan was before her, no more than a lethal shadow himself. Even the sun seemed to avoid the broad plains of his tan face, though the wind dared ruffle the silken black strands of his hair across it. "We have a bargain, girl." Alid met the depthless gaze. "You did not specify when I had to tell you, so I may take as much time as I wish to recall details, if you desire to wring every last one of them from me." His teeth flashed. "Do not toy with me." "Or what?" She stepped around him as if he were no more than a rock in a stream. Of course, walking with temper was a bit difficult when every other step was limping, but she kept her chin high. "Kill me, hurt me, and you'll still be out of answers." Faster than she could see, his arm lashed out, gripping her by the elbow. "Marion," he growled. That name. She looked up at his harsh, wild face, a face born in a different age, a different world. "Take your hand off me." Lorcan, to her surprise, did so immediately, but his face did not change, not a flicker, as he said, "You will tell me what I wish to know." The thing in her pocket began thrumming and beating, a phantom heartbeat in her bones. Lorcan yielded a step, his nostrils flaring delicately, as if he could sense that stone awakening. "What are you?" he said quietly. I'm nothing, she said, voice hollow. Maybe once she found Aelin and Adian, she'd find some purpose, some way to be of use to the world. For now, she was a messenger, a courier of this stone, to Selena Sardathian. However, Elide might find one person in such an endless, vast world. She had to get north, and quickly. Why do you go to Aelin, Galathinius? The question was too tense to be casual. Now every inch of Lorcan's body seemed restrained, leashed rage, predatory instincts. You know the Queen, she breathed. He blinked, not in surprise, but to buy himself time. He did know, and he was considering what to tell her, how to tell her. Selena Sardathian is in the Queen's service, he said. Your two paths are one. Find one and you'll find the other. He paused, waiting. Would this be her life then? Wretched people, always looking out for themselves, every kindness coming at a cost. Would her own queen at least gaze at her with warmth in her eyes? Would Aelin even remember her? Marion, he said again, the word laced with a growl. Her mother's name. Her mother and her father, the last people who had looked at her with true affection. Even Finula, all those years locked in that tower, had always watched her with some mixture of pity and fear. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been held, or comforted, or smiled at with any genuine love for who she was. Words were suddenly hard, the energy to dredge up a lie or retort too much to bother with, so Elide ignored Lorcan's command and headed back toward the cluster of painted wagons. Manon had come for her, she reminded herself with each step. Manon, and Astrin, and Sorel, but even they had left her alone in the woods. Pity, she reminded herself. Self-pity would do her no good. Not with so many miles between her and whatever shred of a future she stood a chance at finding. But even when she arrived, handed over her burden, and found Aelin, what could she offer? She couldn't even read. Gods above, the mere thought of explaining that to Aelin, to anyone. She'd think on it later. Does SJM always have to have, like, one illiterate person in her books? She'd wash the Queen's clothes if she had to. At least she didn't need to be literate for that. Elide didn't hear Lorcan this time as he approached, arms laden with massive logs. You will tell me what you know, he said through his teeth. She almost sighed, but he added, once you're better. She supposed that, to him, sorrow and despair would be some sort of sickness. Fine. Fine, he said right back. He doesn't want to leave. Stop. Their companions were smiling when she and Lorcan returned. They had found dry ground on the other side of the wagons, solid enough for tents. Elide spied the one that had been raised for her and Lorcan and wished it would rain. Lorcan had trained enough warriors to know when not to push. He'd tortured enough enemies to know when they were one slice or snap away from breaking in ways that would make them useless. So Marion, when her scent had changed, when he'd felt even the strange, otherworldly power hidden in her blood shift to sorrow, worse, to hopelessness, he'd wanted to tell her not to bother with hope anyway. But she was barely into womanhood. Perhaps hope, foolish as it was, had gotten her out of Morath. At least her cleverness had, lies and all. He'd dealt with enough people, killed and bedded and fought alongside enough people to know Marion wasn't wicked, or conniving, or wholly selfish. He wished she was, because it'd make it easier, make his task so much easier. But if she didn't tell him about Morath, if he broke her from pushing too much, he needed every advantage when she slipped into that keep, and when he slipped out again. She'd done it once. Perhaps Marion was the only person alive who had managed to escape. He was about to explain that to her when he saw what she was staring at. The tent. Their tent. Umbriel came forward, throwing her usual wary glance his way, and slyly informed Marion they'd finally have a night alone together. Arms full of logs, Lorcan could only watch as that pale face of sorrow and despair transformed into youth and mischief, into blushing anticipation, as easily as if Marion had held up a mask. She even gave him a flirting glance before beaming at Umbriel and rushing to dump her armful of sticks and twigs into the pit they'd cleared for the nightly fire. He possessed the good sense to at least smile at the woman who was supposed to be his wife, but by the time he'd followed to drop his own burden into the fire pit, she'd stalked off for the tent, set a good distance away from the others. It was small. he realized with no tiny amount of horror, probably meant for the sword thrower who'd last used it. Marian's slim figure slipped through the white canvas flaps with hardly a ripple. Lorcan just frowned a bit before ducking inside, and remained ducking slightly. His head would go straight through the canvas if he stood up to his full height. Not the, oh, there's only one bed trope. No! Lorcan just frowned a bit. Oh wait, hold on, sorry. I already read that part. Woven mats atop gathered rushes covered the stuffy interior, and Marian stood on the other side of the tent, cringing at the sleeping roll on the makeshift floor. The tent probably had enough room for a proper bed and table if need be, but unless they were camping longer than a night, he doubted they'd get any of those things. "I'll sleep on the ground," he offered blandly. "You take the roll." "What if someone comes in? Then you'll say we got into a fight." "Every night?" Marian pivoted, her rich eyes meeting his. The cold, weary face was back. Lorcan considered her words. "If someone walks into our tent without permission tonight, no one here will make the same mistake again." He'd punished men in his war camps for less, but her eyes remained weary, wholly unimpressed and unmoved. "Fine," she said again. Too close. Far too close to the edge of snapping entirely. "I could find some buckets, heat water, and you could bathe in here if you want. I'll stand watch outside." Creature comforts. To get her to trust him, be grateful to him, to want to help him, to ease the dangerous brittleness. Okay, sure. That's what it is. That's what it is. Indeed, Marian peered down at herself. The white shirt that was now dirt-flecked, the brown leather pants that were filthy, the boots. "I'll offer Umbrella coin to wash it all for you tonight. If no other clothes to wear, you can sleep without them." Wariness faded into a flash of dismay. "With you in here?" He avoided the urge to roll his eyes. She blurted, "What about your own clothes?" "What of them?" "They're filthy too." "I can wait another night." She'd likely beg to sleep in the wagon if he was naked in here. "Why should I be the only one naked? Wouldn't the ruse work better if you and I both took the opportunity at once?" "You're very young," he said carefully, "and I'm very old." "How old?" She'd never asked. "Old." She shrugged. "Body is a body. You reek as badly as I do. Go sleep." Stop! "Go sleep outside if you won't wash." A test. Not her. Her small hands were braced on the mangled, discolored rose on uneven feet, wincing at her wrecked leg. "Oh. Sorry, I didn't know we were buffering. Sorry." Are we back? No, we're not back. Is my phone hot? No, my phone's not even hot. We're okay now? Okay. I'll just start at the bottom of the page. I think that's when we started buffering. When Lorcan pushed through the tent again, laden with water, he discovered Marian seated on the bedroll, boots off, that ruined ankle and foot stretched out before her. Her small hands were braced on the mangled, discolored flesh, as if she'd been rubbing the ache from it. How badly does it hurt every day? He sometimes used his magic to brace the ankle, when he remembered, which wasn't often. Marian's focus, however, went right to the steaming cauldron he'd set on the floor, then the bucket he'd hauled over his shoulder for her to use as well. "I've had it since I was a child," she said distantly, as if hypnotized by the clean water. She rose on uneven feet, wincing at her wrecked leg. "I learned to live with it." "That's not an answer. Why do you even care?" The words were barely more than a breath as she unbraided her long, thick hair, still fixated on the bath. He was curious. He wanted to know how and when and why. Marian was beautiful. Surely marring her like that had been done with some ill intent, or to prevent something worse. She at last cut him a glance. "You said you'd stand watch. I thought you meant outside." He snorted. Indeed he did. "Enjoy yourself," he said, pushing out of the tent once more. Lorcan stood in the grasses, monitoring the busy camp, the wide bowl of the darkening sky. He hated the plains. Too much open space, too much visibility. Behind him, his ears picked up the sigh and hiss of leather sliding down skin, the rustle of rough woven cloth being peeled off, then fainter, softer sounds of more delicate fabric sliding away, then silence, followed by a very, very quiet rustling, like she didn't want even the gods hearing what she was doing. Hay crunched, then a thud of the mattress roll lifting and falling. The little witch was hiding something. The haze snapped again as she returned to the cauldron. Hiding something under the mattress, something she'd been carrying with her and didn't want him knowing about. Water splashed and Marion let out a moan of surprising depth and sincerity. He shut out the sound. But even as he did, Lorcan's thoughts drifted toward Rowan and his bitch queen. All right. Marion and the queen were about the same age. One dark, one golden. Would the queen bother at all with Marion once she arrived? Likely, if her curiosity was piqued about why she wished to see Selena Sardothian, but what about after? It wasn't his concern. He'd left his conscience on the cobblestones of the back streets of Doranel 5 centuries ago. He'd killed men who had begged for their lives, wrecked entire cities, and never once looked back at the smoldering rubble. Rowan had too. Goddamn Whitethorn had been his most effective general, assassin, and executioner for centuries. They had laid waste to kingdoms and then drunk and bedded themselves into stupors in the following days-long celebrations on the ruins. This winter, he'd had a damn fine commander at his disposal, brutal and vicious and willing to do just about anything Lorcan ordered. The next time he'd seen Rowan, the prince had been roaring, desperate to fling himself into lethal darkness to save the life of a princess with no throne. Lorcan had known. In that moment, Lorcan had known. As he'd pinned Rowan into the grass outside Mistward, the prince thrashing and screaming for Aelin Galathinius, that everything was about to change. Knew that the commander he'd valued was altered irrevocably. No longer would they gut themselves on wine and women. No longer would Rowan gaze toward a horizon without some glimmer of longing in his eyes. Love had broken a perfect killing tool. Lorcan wondered if it would take him centuries more to stop being so pissed about it. And the queen, princess whatever Aelin called herself, she was a fool. She could have bartered a Thrill's ring for Maeve's armies, for an alliance to wipe Morath off the earth. Even not knowing what the ring was, she could have used it to her advantage. But she'd chosen Rowan, a prince with no crown, no army, no allies. They deserved to perish together. Marion's soaked head popped out of the tent, and Lorcan twisted to see the heavy wool blanket wrapped around her like a gown. "Can you bring the clothes now?" She chucked her pile out. She'd bundled her underthings in her white shirt, and the leathers. They'd never be dry before morning, and would likely shrink beyond use if washed improperly. Lorcan stooped, picking up the bundle of clothes and trying not to peer into the tent to learn what she'd hidden beneath the bedroll. What about standing guard? Her hair was plastered to her head, heightening the sharp lines in her cheekbones, her fine nose. But her eyes were bright again, her full lips once more like a rosebud as she said, "Please get them washed, quickly." Lorcan didn't bother confirming as he carried her clothes away from the tent, leaving her to sit in partial nakedness inside. Umbriel was in the middle of cooking whatever was in the pot over the fire, likely rabbit stew, again. Lorcan examined the clothes in his hands. 30 minutes later, he returned to the tent, plate of food in hand. Marion was perched on the bedroll, foot stretched out before her, blanket tucked under her shoulders. Her skin was so pale. He'd never seen such white, unmarred skin, as if she'd never been let outside. Her dark brows furrowed at the plate, then at the bundle under his arm. "Umbriel was busy, so I washed your clothes myself." She flushed. Listen to me. Listen to me. Listen to me. Can y'all see my vision? Y'all. Can y'all see the vision? Please. Please. "A body is a body," he repeated simply to her. "So are undergarments." She frowned, but her attention was again riveted on the plate. He set it down before her. "I got you dinner, since I assumed you didn't want to sit among everyone in your blanket." Stop. He dumped the pile of clothes on her bedroll. "And I got you clothes from Molly. She's charging you, of course, but at least you won't sleep naked." She dug into the stew without so much as thanking him. Lorcan was about to leave when she said, "My uncle. He's a commander at Morath." Lorcan froze and looked right to the bedroll, but Marion continued between bites. "He locked me in the dungeon once. The wind in the grasses died. The campfire far beyond their tent flickered, and people around it huddled closer together as the nighttime insects went silent, and the small, furred creatures of the plain scampered into their burrows. Marion either didn't notice the surge of his dark power, the magic kissed by death himself, or didn't care. She said, "His name is Vernon, and he's clever and cruel, and he will likely try to keep you alive if you are caught. He wields people to gain power for himself. He has no mercy, no soul. There's no mortal code that guides him." Or moral, sorry. She went back to her food, done for the night. Lorcan said quietly, "Would you like me to kill him for you?" Shut up. Yes? Yes, please. Stop. Stop! Oh my God! Her limpid, dark eyes rose to his face, and for a moment he could see the woman she'd become, was already becoming, someone who, regardless of where she'd been born, any queen would prize at her side. Would there be a cost? Lorcan hid his smile. Smart, cunning little witch. No, he said, and meant it. Why did he lock you in the dungeon? Marion's white throat bobbed once, twice. She seemed to hold his stare through effort of will, through a refusal not to back down from him, but from her own fears. Because he wished to see if his bloodline could be crossed with the Valg. That's why I was brought to Morath, to be bred like a prize mare. Every thought emptied out of Lorcan's head. He had seen and dealt and endured many, many unspeakable things, but this... Did he succeed? He managed to ask. Not with me. There were others before me who... Help came too late for them. That explosion was not accidental, was it? A small shake of the head. You did it? He glanced to the bedroll, to whatever she hid beneath. Again, the shake of a head. I will not say who or how, not without risking the lives of the people who saved me. Or the Ilken... No, the Ilken are not the creatures that were bred in the in the catacombs. Those came from the mountains around Morath, through far darker methods. Maeve had to know. She had to know what they were doing in Morath. The horrors being bred there, the army of demons and beasts to rival any from legend. She would never ally with such evil, never be foolish enough to ally with the Valg, not when she warred with them millennia ago. But if she did not fight, how long would it be before these beasts were howling around Dornell, before it was his own continent under siege? Dornell could hold out, but he would likely be dead, once he found some way to destroy the keys and Maeve punished him, and with him dead and Whitethorn likely carry on too. How long would Dornell last? Decades? Years? A question snagged in Lorcan's mind, drawing him to the present, to the stuffy little tent. Your foot has been ruined for years, though. He locked you in the dungeon that long. No, she said, not even flinching at his rough description. I was only in the dungeon for a week. The ankle, the chain. He did that to me long before. What chain? She blinked, and he knew she'd meant to avoid telling him that one particular detail. But now that he looked, he could make out, among the mass of scars, a white band. And there, around her perfect, lovely other ankle, was its twin. A wind laced with the dust and coldness of a tomb gnawed through the field. Marion merely said, When you kill my uncle, ask him yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, girl. I love him. I love him. I love them. And if they don't end up together, I feel like I've said this. How many times have I said the sentence, if they don't end up together, da-da-da-da-da. I feel like I've said it so much in this series. But I'm for real about them. I want them to be together. Stop. They deserve to be together. What the fuck? We're We're not even reading about them anymore. We're back to fucking Rolf. I don't give a shit about him. Well, on the one hand, at least Rolf's map worked, sorry. This is chapter 31. It had been Rowan's idea, actually, and she might have felt slightly guilty for letting Adian and Lysandra believe the Pirate Lord had only gone after the amulet of Orinth, but at least they now knew his unholy map functioned, and that the Pirate Lord was indeed living in terror of the Valg returning to this harbor. She wondered what Rolf made of it, what his map had shown him of the word key, if it revealed the difference between it and the wordstone rings his men had been enslaved with. Whatever the reason, the Pirate Lord had sent his barmaid to scout for any hint of the Valg, not realizing Rowan had selected that dead-end alley to ensure only someone sent by Rolf would venture so far down it. And since Aelin had no doubt whatsoever that Adian and Lysandra had snuck through the streets unnoticed, well, at least that part of her evening had gone right. As for the rest of it, it was just past midnight when Aelin wondered how the hell she and Rowan would ever go back to normalcy if they survived this war. If there'd be a day when it wasn't easy to leap over rooftops as if they were stones on a stream, to break into someone's room and hold a blade to the occupant's throat. They did the first two within the span of 15 minutes, and as they found Gavriel and Fenris waiting for them in their shared room in the Sea Dragon Inn, Aelin supposed she needn't bother with the third, even if both she and Rowan kept their hands within casual reach of their daggers while they leaned against the wall beside the now shut window. They'd unlocked it with Rowan's wind, only to have a candle ignite the moment the window swung away, revealing two stone-faced Fey warriors, both dressed and armed. "You could have used the door," Fenris said, arms crossed, a bit too casually. "Why bother when a dramatic entrance is so much more fun?" Aelin countered. Fenris's beautiful face twitched with amusement that didn't quite meet his onyx eyes. "What a shame it'd be for you to miss out on any of that." She grinned at him. He grinned at her. She supposed both of their smiles were less of a grin and more teeth-exposing. She snorted. "You two look like you enjoyed your summer in Dornell. How sweet Aunt Maeve." Gavriel's tattooed hands closed into loose fists. "You deny me the right to see my son, and yet you barge into our room in the dead of the night to demand we divulge information about our blood-sworn queen." "One, I did not deny you anything, kitty cat." Fenris let out what might have been a choking sound. "It's your son's decision, not mine. I don't have enough time to oversee or really care." Lies. "It must be hard to find the time to care at all," Fenris cut in, "when you're facing a mortal lifespan." A sly, cutting glance at Rowan. "Or is she due to settle soon?" Oh, he was a bastard. A bitter, hard-edged bastard. The laughing side of the coin to Lorcan's sullen brooding. Wait. What? He's Lorcan's twin? What? How did I... Oh. Maeve certainly had a type. Rowan's face yielded nothing. Oh, okay. I was so confused. I was like, what the fuck? I thought his twin was, someone else. Sorry. That threw me off. Rowan's face yielded nothing. The matter of Aelin's settling is none of your concern, isn't it? Knowing if she's immortal changes things. Many things. Fenris, Gavriel warned. She knew enough about it. The transition pure-blooded Fae and some demi-Fae went through once their bodies locked into immortal youth. It was a rough process, their bodies and magic needing months to adjust to the sudden freezing and reordering of their aging process. Some Fae had no control over their power. Some lost it entirely during the time it took to settle. And demi-Fae, some might be longer-lived. Some might have the true immortal gift given to them, like Lorcan, and possibly Adian. They'd find out in the next few years if he'd take after his mother, or the male sitting across the room from her, if they survived the war. And as for her, she did not let herself think about it, precisely for the reasons Fenris claimed. "I don't see what it would change," she said to him. "There's already one immortal queen. Surely a second would be nothing new." And will you hand out blood oaths to males who catch your eye, or will it just be Whitethorn at your side? She could feel the aggression beginning to pour off Rowan, and she was half tempted to grumble. They're not your friends. Deal with them. Or they're your friends, sorry. But he kept quiet, containing himself as she said, You didn't seem nearly so interested in me that day at Mistward. Trust me, he was, Gavriel muttered. Aelin lifted a brow, but Fenris was giving Gavriel a look that promised a slow death. Rowan explained. Fenris was the one who volunteered to train you when Maeve told us you'd come to Wendelin. Was he now? Interesting. Why? Rowan opened his mouth, but Fenris cut him off. It would have gotten me out of Dornell, and we likely would have had far more fun, anyway. I know what a bastard Whitethorn can be when it comes to training. You two would have stayed on that rooftop in Varese and drunk yourselves to death, Rowan said. And as for training, you're alive today because of that training, boyo. Fenris rolled his eyes. Younger, she realized. Still old by human standards, but Fenris was and felt younger, wilder. Speaking of Varese, Aelin said with cool amusement, and Dornell, I will warn you, Gavriel said quietly, that there is little we know regarding Maeve's plans, and less still we can reveal with the Blood Oath's constraints. How does she do it? Aelin asked baldly. With Rowan, it's not... Every order I give him, even casual ones, are his to decide what to do with. Only when I actively pull on the bond can I get him to yield, and even then it's more of a suggestion. It's different with her, Gavriel said softly. Dependent on the ruler it is sworn to. You two took the oath to each other with love in your hearts. You had no desire to own or rule him. Aelin tried not to flinch at the truth of that word. Love. That day, when Rowan had looked into her eyes as he drank her blood, she'd started to realize what it was. That the feeling that passed between them, so powerful there was no language to describe it. It was not mere friendship, but something born of and strengthened by it. Maeve, Fenris added, offers it with those things in mind, until the bond itself is born of obedience to her, no matter what. She orders, we submit, for whatever she wishes. Shadows danced in those eyes, and Aelin's fingers curled into fists, that Maeve felt the need to force any of them into her bed. Rowan had told her their familial bloodline, while distant, was still close enough that it kept Maeve from seeking him out. But the others... So you couldn't break it on your own. Never. If we did so, the magic that binds us to her would kill us in the process, Fenris said. She wondered if he'd tried. How many times? He angled his head to the side, the movement purely lupine. Why are you asking this? Because if Maeve somehow can claim ownership over Adian's life thanks to his bloodline, I can't do a damn thing to help him. Aelin shrugged. Because you sidetracked me. She gave him a little smile that she knew drove Rowan and Adian insane. And yes, it seemed it was a surefire way to piss off any female, because ire flashed across Fenris's stupidly perfect face. She picked at her nails. I know you two are old, and up past your bedtime, so I'll keep this quick. Maeve's armada sails for Ilwi. We are now allies, but my path might take me into a direct conflict with that fleet, maybe with her, whether I desire it or not. Rowan had tensed slightly, and she wished it wouldn't look weak to glance at him, try to read whatever had sparked the reaction. Fenris looked at Rowan, as if it were habit. I think the bigger concern is whether Maeve sails to join Erwin. She could go either way. Her network of information is too vast, Rowan countered. There's not a chance she doesn't already know the Empire's fleet is camped out in the Gulf of Oro. Aelin wondered how often her Fey Prince had to silently correct himself about what terms to use. Her. Wondered if he ever missed the two males frowning at them. Maeve could be going to intercept it, Gavriel mused. Vanquish Morath's fleet as proof of her intentions to assist you, then play it into whatever agenda she has beyond that. Aelin clicked her tongue. Even with Fey soldiers on those ships, she couldn't be stupid enough to risk such catastrophic losses just to get into my good graces again. No matter what Aelin knew, she'd accept any offer of aid from Maeve, risk or no. Fenris's edged smile flashed. Oh, the losses of Fey lives would be of little concern to her. It likely just increases her excitement about it. Careful, Gavriel said. God, he nearly sounded identical to Adian with that tone. Aelin went on. Regardless, you two know what we faced with Erwin. You know what Maeve wanted from me in Doranel, what Lorcan left to do. Their faces had resumed their warrior calm and didn't so much as flicker as she asked, Did Maeve give you an order to take those keys from Lorcan as well? And the ring? Or is it just his life you'll be claiming? If we say she gave us the order to take everything, Fenry strawled, bracing his hands behind him on the bed. Will you kill us, Heir of Fire? It'll depend on how useful you prove to be as an ally, Aelin simply said. The weight hanging between her breasts beneath her shirt rumbled as if in answer. Rolf has weapons, Gavriel said quietly, or will be receiving them. Aelin lifted a brow. And will hearing about it cost me? Gavriel wasn't stupid enough to ask for Adian. The warrior just said, They're called fire lances, Alchemists in the southern continent developed them for their own territory wars. More than that, we don't know, but the device can be wielded by one man, to devastating effect. And with magic users still so new to their returned gifts, or mostly dead thanks to Ardalan, she would not be alone, not the only fire wielder on that battlefield, but only if Rolf's armada became hers, if he did what she was so carefully guiding him to do. Reaching out to the southern continent could take months she didn't have. But if Rolf had already ordered a supply, Aelin nodded at Rowan once more, and they pushed off the wall. That's it? Fenris demanded. Do we get to know what you plan to do with this information, or are we just your lackeys too? You don't trust me, I don't trust you, Aelin said. It's easier that way. She nudged open the window with her elbow. But thank you for the information. Fenris's brows rose high enough that she wondered if Maeve had uttered those words in his hearing, and she honestly wished she'd melted her aunt that day in Doranel. She and Rowan leapt and climbed the rooftops of Skull's Bay, the ancient shingles still slick from the day's rain. When the ocean rose glittered like a pale jewel a block ahead, Aelin paused in the shadows beside a chimney and murmured, There's no room for error. Rowan laid a hand on her shoulder. I know. We'll make it count. Her eyes burned. We're playing a game against two monarchs who have ruled and schemed longer than most kingdoms have existed. And even for her, the odds of outsmarting or outmaneuvering them. Seeing the Cadre, how Maeve contains them. She came so close to separating us this spring. So close. Rowan traced his thumb over her mouth. Even if Maeve had kept me enslaved, I would have fought her. Every day, every hour, every breath. He kissed her softly and said onto her lips, I would have fought for the rest of my life to find a way to return to you again. Not this corny-ass shit. I knew it the moment you emerged from the Valak's darkness and smiled at me through your flames. She swallowed the tightness in her throat and raised a brow. You were willing to do that before all this? So few benefits back then. Amusement and something deeper danced in his eyes. What I felt for you in Doranel, and what I feel for you now are the same. I just didn't think I'd ever get the chance to act on it. She knew why she needed to hear it. He knew too. Darrow's and Rolf's words danced around in her head, an endless chorus of bitter threats, but Aelin only smirked at him. Then act away, Prince. Rowan let out a low laugh and said nothing else as he claimed her mouth, nudging her back against the crumbling chimney. She opened for him, and his tongue swept in, thorough, lazy. Oh. Okay. This was what drove her out of her mind, this fire between them. They could burn the entire world to ashes with it. He was hers, and she was his, and they found each other across centuries of bloodshed and loss, across oceans and kingdoms and war. Rowan pulled back, breathing heavily, and whispered against her lips, Even when you're in another kingdom, Aelin, your fire is still in my blood, my mouth. She let out a soft moan, arching into him as his hand grazed her. Oh, I don't think I can read this out loud. Not caring if anyone spotted them in the streets below. You said you wouldn't take me against a tree the first time, she breathed, sliding her hands up his arms, across the breadth of his sculpted chest. What about a chimney? Rowan huffed another laugh and nipped at her bottom lip. Remind me again why I missed you. Aelin chuckled, but the sound was quickly silenced as Rowan claimed her mouth again and kissed her deeply in the moonlight. Oh. Okay. Okay. Chapter 32. Adian had been up half the night. Oh my god, I'm sorry. Adian had been up half the night, debating the merits of every possible place to meet his father. Oh no! On the beach seemed like it was asking for a private conversation he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to have. And Rolf's headquarters felt too public. The end courtyard felt too formal. He tossed and turned on his cot, nearly asleep when he heard Aelin and Rowan returning well past midnight. Not surprising they'd snuck out without telling anyone. But at least she'd gone with the Fey Prince. Lysandra, sleeping like the dead, hadn't stirred as their steps had creaked in the hall outside. She'd barely made it through the door hours earlier, Dorian already asleep on his cot, before she'd... Sorry, my phone is dying. Are we surprised? No. Lysandra, sleeping like the dead, hadn't stirred as their steps had creaked in the hall outside. She'd barely made it through the door hours earlier, Dorian already asleep on his cot, before she'd shifted back into her usual body and swayed on her feet. Adian had hardly noticed her nakedness, not when she teetered and he lunged to grab her before she ate carpet. She'd blinked dazedly at him, her skin drained of color, so he gently set her on the edge of the bed, grabbed the throw across it, and draped it around her. "You've seen naked women plenty," she said, not bothering to hold it in place. "It's too hot for wool." So the blanket slid off her back as she leaned forward, bracing her forearms on her knees and breathing deep. "God, it makes me so dizzy." Adian put a hand on her bare back and gently stroked. She stiffened at the touch, but he made broad, light circles over the velvet soft skin. After a moment, she let out a sound that might have been a purr. The silence went on. Sorry, I got distracted by a bird. The silence went on for long enough that Adian realized she'd somehow fallen asleep. And not normal sleep, but the sleep that Aelin and Rowan sometimes went into in order to let their magic recover. So deep and thorough, no training could pierce it. No instincts could override it. The body had claimed what it needed, at any cost, at any vulnerability. Easing her into his arms before she could fall right onto her face, Adian hauled her over his shoulder. "Bitch, at least be a little bit more gentle," and carried her around to the head of the bed. He flipped back the crisp cotton sheets with one hand and then laid her down, her once again long hair covering her high, firm, so much smaller than the ones he'd first seen her with. He didn't care what size they were. They were beautiful in both forms. All right. It's bordering creepy. She hadn't awoken again, but he drifted to his own cot. He only slept once the light had shifted to the watery gray trickle before dawn, awoke just past sunrise, and gave up on sleep entirely. He doubted any sort of rest would come until this meeting was past him, so Adian bathed and dressed, debating if it made him a fool to brush his hair for his father. Lysandra was awake as he padded back into the room. The color mercifully returned to her cheeks, the king still asleep on his cot. But the shifter looked Adian over and said, "That's what you're wearing?" Lysandra made him change out of his dirty travel clothes, barged into Aelin and Rowan's room wearing no more than her own bedsheet, and took whatever she wanted from the Fey Prince's armoire. Aelin's bark to get out was likely heard from across the bay, and Lysandra was smirking with feline wickedness as she returned, chucking the green jacket and pants at him. When he emerged from the bathing room, the lady was in clothes of her own. Where she'd gotten them, he had no idea. They were simple, black, tight pants, knee-high boots, and a tucked-in white shirt. She'd left her hair half down, half up, and now twisted the silken mass of it over her shoulder. Lysandra surveyed him with an approving smirk. Much better. Much more princely and less derelict. Derelict? Yeah. Adian gave her a mocking bow. Dorian stirred, a cool breeze fluttering in as if his magic awoke as well. Squinted at them both, then at the clock atop the mantel. He hauled the pillow over his eyes and went back to sleep. Very kingly, Adian told him, heading for the door. Dorian grumbled something through the pillow that Adian chose not to hear. He and Lysandra grabbed a quiet breakfast in the dining room, though he had to force half the food down. The shifter asked no questions, either from consideration or because she was so busy stuffing her face with every single morsel offered at the buffet table. Gods, the females in his court ate more than he did. He supposed the magic burned through their energy reserves so fast it was a miracle they weren't constantly biting his head off. They walked to Rolf's tavern in silence, too, the sentries out front stepping aside without so much as a question. He reached for the handle when Lysandra finally said, "You're sure?" He nodded, and that was that. It was a little creepy of him just talking about her boobs and how he liked them, no matter what shape or size they were. I mean, I get that it was supposed to be sweet, but it came off a little creepy. Adian opened the door, finding the cadre precisely where he'd guessed they'd be at this hour, eating breakfast in the tap room. Sorry. The two males halted as they entered. Oh. Oh, God. And Adian's eyes went right to the golden-haired man, one of two, but there was no denying which one was his. Gavriel set his fork on his half-eaten plate. He wore clothes like Rowan's, and like the Fey Prince, he was heavily armed, even at breakfast. Aelin was the other side of his fair coin, but Gavriel was a murky reflection. The honed, broad features, the harsh mouth, that was where he'd gotten them from. The cropped golden hair was different, more sunshine to Adian's shoulder-length honey gold, and Adian's skin was ash river golden, not the sun-kissed deep tan. Slowly, Gavriel stood. Adian wondered if he'd also inherited that grace, the predatory stillness, the unreadable, intent face, or if they'd both been trained that way. The lion incarnate. He'd wanted to do it this way, little more than an ambush, so his father wouldn't have time to prepare pretty speeches. He wanted to see what his father would do when they confronted him. What to do when confronted with him, what sort of male he was, how he reacted to anything. The other warrior, Fenris, was glancing between them, a fork still raised to his open mouth. I could see it perfectly. Adian made himself walk, knees surprisingly steady, even if his body felt as if it belonged to someone else. Lysandra kept it aside, solid and bright-eyed. With every step he took, his father surveyed him, face yielding nothing until... "You look..." Gavriel breathed, sinking into his chair. "You look so much like her." Adian knew Gavriel didn't mean Aelin. Even Fenris looked at the lion now, at the grief rippling in those tawny eyes. Aww. But Adian barely remembered his mother, barely recalled anything more than her dying, wrecked face. So he said, "She died, so your queen wouldn't get her claws on me." He wasn't sure his father was breathing. Lysandra stepped closer, a solid rock in the thrashing sea of his rage. That's the quote. That's the one. Adian pinned his... That's the one. Oh my God. Ooh. And again, I don't have my tabs! Adian pinned his father with a look, not sure where the words came from, the wrath. But there they were, snapping from his lips like whips. They could have curled her in the Fey compounds, but she wouldn't go near them. Wouldn't let them come for fear of Maeve. Cured her, sorry, not curled her. Cured her in the Fey compound, but she wouldn't go near them. Wouldn't let them come for fear of Maeve. He spat the name, knowing I existed, for fear I'd be enslaved to her, as you were. His father's tanned face had drained of all color. Whatever Gavriel had suspected until now, Adian didn't care. The wolf snarled at the lion. She was 23 years old. She never married, and her family shunned her. She refused to tell anyone who'd sired me, and took their disdain, their humiliation, without an ounce of self-pity. She did it because she loved me, not you. And he suddenly wished he'd asked Aelin to come, so he could tell her to burn this warrior into ashes like that commander in Ilium, because looking at the face, his face, he hated him. He hated him for the 23-year-old his mother had been, younger than he now was when she died, alone and sorrowful. Adian growled, "If your bitch of a queen tries to take me, I'll slit her throat." If she hurts my family any more than she already has, I'll slit yours too. His father rasped. Adian. The sound of the name his mother had given him on his lips. I want nothing from you, unless you plan to help us, in which case I will not object to the assistance. But beyond that, I want nothing from you. I'm sorry, his father said, those lion's eyes full of such grief. Adian wondered if he'd just struck a male already down. Oh. I'm not the one you need to apologize to, he said, turning toward the door. His father's chair scraped against the floor. Adian kept walking, Lysandra falling into place beside him. Please, his father said as Adian's hand clamped down on the handle. Go to hell, Adian said, and left. Now you better cry. Now you better cry. Okay. Oh my god. He didn't have to be so mean. He didn't return to the ocean, Rose, and he couldn't stand to be around people, to be around their sounds and smells. So he strode for the dense mountain above the bay, losing himself in the jungle of leaves and shade and damp soil. Lysandra stayed a step behind him, silent as he was. It wasn't until he'd found a rocky outcropping jutting from the side of the mountain to overlook the bay, the town, the pristine waters beyond, that he paused, that he sat and breathed. Lysandra sat beside him on the flat rock, crossing her legs beneath her. He said, I didn't expect to say any of that. She was gazing toward the nearby watchtower nestled at the base of the mountain. He watched her green eyes survey the lower level where Shipbreaker was wrapped around a massive wheel, the spiraling exterior staircase up the tower itself, all the way up to the upper levels, where a catapult and a turret-mounted, massive harpoon, or was it a giant crossbow, was locked into place, its wielder's seat an arrow aimed at an invisible enemy in the bay below. With the size of the weapon and the machine that had been rigged to launch it into the bay, he had no doubt it could smash through a hole and do lethal damage to a ship, or spear 3 men on it. Lysandra said simply, You spoke from the heart. Perhaps it's good he heard that. We need them to work with us. I might have made an enemy of him. She tucked her hair over her shoulder. Trust me, Adian, you have not. If you told him to crawl over hot coals, he would have. He'll realize soon enough who exactly I am, and perhaps not be so desperate. Who exactly do you think you are? She frowned at him. Ardalan's whore? Is that what you still think of yourself? The general who held his kingdom together, who saved his people when they were forgotten even by their own queen. That's the man I know. She snarled softly and nodded him. And if he starts pointing fingers, I'll remind him that he served that bitch in Doranel for centuries without question. Adian snorted. I'll pay good money to see you go toe-to-toe with him, and Fenris. She nudged him with an elbow. You say the word, General, and I'll transform into the face of their nightmares. And what creature is that? She gave him a knowing little smile. Something I've been working on. I don't want to know, do I? Her white teeth flashed. No, you really don't. He laughed, surprised he could even do so. He's a handsome bastard, I'll give him that. I think Maeve likes to collect pretty men. Adian snorted. Why not? She has to deal with them for eternity. They might as well be pleasant to look at. She laughed again, and the sound loosed a weight from his shoulders. Them. What was unnecessary? Okay, but you also have to look at it. You have to separate your feelings for Adian and Gavriel to really look at the situation, because I mean, he's kind of got a good reason to be mad at him. Adian has a good reason to be mad at Gavriel. Granted, he doesn't know the whole story. He doesn't know the whole story. And he doesn't know why Gavriel chose to go with Maeve and, like, his whole backstory. All he knows is that his mom could have been saved, but she wasn't because she was scared that Maeve was going to get her hands on him. Yeah. I do agree with that. I just think his temper just got the best of him in this situation. And maybe he should have thought before he spoke by telling him to go to hell. But that's how he felt in the moment, and he said it, and it's out there. So now we just get to see what Gabriel is gonna do. I hope that they have like a chance to sit down and talk everything through. And he also just feels, I don't know. I feel bad for both of them. I just want everyone to be happy. Damn. Bearing both Goldrin and Damaris for once, Aelin walked into the Sea Dragon 2 hours later and wished for the days when she could sleep without the dread of urgent. Where's my charger? Have you ever had the feeling you're drawn to someone? Sorry, y'all. My phone's dying. I'm trying to plug in my charger right now. Looking for a boyfriend. I see her. Now let's just hope that this doesn't fall. I'm literally balancing my phone on my charger right now, so let's just hope it doesn't fall. Wish for the days when she might have had the time to bed her God's damned lover and not choose to catch a few hours of sleep instead. She'd meant to. Last night they'd returned to the inn and she'd bathed faster than she'd ever washed before. She'd even emerged from the bathing room naked and found her Fae Prince asleep atop the glowing white bed, still clothed, looking for all the world like he'd intended to close his eyes while she washed, and the heavy exhaustion on him. She let Rowan rest, had curled up beside him above the blankets, still naked, and had been unconscious before her head had settled against his chest. There would be a time, she knew, when they would not be able to sleep so safely, so soundly. A grand total of 5 minutes before Lysandra barged in, Rowan had awoken and begun the process of awakening her too, slowly, with taunting proprietary strokes down her bare torso, her thighs, assented with little biting kisses to her mouth, her ear, her neck. But as soon as Lysandra had thundered through the room to steal clothes for Adian, as soon as she'd explained where Adian was going, the interruption had lasted, made her remember what exactly she needed to accomplish today. I would be very... Kale moments versus Adian's moments. Stop it. I was not being unfair to Kale and Adian, I don't think. They both said some dumb shit, but I don't not like any of them. Yes, the acrylic sound. One of the only reasons why I get my nails done also. And because I like to... No, I can't. Oh, I like to flick them. Maybe that caution would make Rolf more inclined to agree to her request today, if she played it right. Aelin gave Rolf a little smile and leaned against the vacant table beside theirs, the chipped gold lettering on the slats reading Mist Cutter. Rowan took up a spot beside her, his knee brushing hers, like even a few feet of distance was unbearable, but she smiled a bit wider at Rolf. I came to see if you changed your mind about my alliance. Rolf drummed his tattooed fingers on the table, right over some gilded letters that read Thresher, and beside it, a map of the continent had been spread between Rolf and the Fae warriors. Not the map she really, truly needed now that she knew the damn thing worked, but Aelin stiffened at what she beheld. What is that? She said. noting the silver figurines camped across the middle of the continent, an impenetrable line from the Farian Gap to the mouth of the Avery, and the additional figures in the Gulf of Oro, and in Melisande, in Fenharrow, and near Ilwi's northern border. Gavriel, looking a bit like someone had knocked him in the head, God, how had that meeting with Adian gone, said before Rolf could get his throat ripped out by Rowan with whatever response he had brewing. Captain Rolf received word this morning. He wanted our counsel. What is this? She said, stabbing a finger near the main line of figurines stretched across the middle of the continent. It's the latest report, Rolf drawled, of the locations of Morath's armies. They have moved into position. Aid to the north is